Perfect.
So welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. This is our June fundraising workshop hosted by me, and my business is Lloyd Collective. And we have Amalia. And Amalia, I've been practicing your name for weeks, and I think I don't get it every time. Do you want to say your name?
Yeah, you've been doing great. It's Amalia Miral Rio.
Okay, Amalia Miraldio. And Amalia is going to present today on 3 ways that white supremacy culture shows up in dating. And then we also have Amanda here from Healing by Choice. And she's here to tell us about the organization we're going to donate to. So Amalia will speak first for about 15-20 minutes, and then Amanda will tell us about Healing by Choice. All of your donations are matched by my organization, Lloyd Collective, as part of my goal to contribute more to organizations run by people of color who have more radical, liberation-oriented missions. And then if there's time at the end, I'm going to talk briefly about three strategies all of you can use on Instagram for growing your audience as a therapist. Let's see. So we are recording, but you will not be recorded unless you speak. So Zoom's just going to record whoever is speaking. So we'd love if we get to see your faces during the presentation. And we will pause in the middle for questions too. All right. Thanks.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for that introduction. So I want to start out with a little bit about my subjectivity of where I'm coming from as I approach this. That I am Mexican American, I identify as mixed race, multi-ethnic, and so that's a little bit about kind of my racial ethnic experience of the world. And then my subjectivity is also influenced by the clients I work with. So I specialize in working with women of color around issues of dating, breakups, old relationship wounds, attachment wounds, but a lot of focus on intimacy and relationships. And I'll put in the chat a couple of links to some of the resources about white supremacy culture. I'm guessing that if you were drawn to this, you probably have some background knowledge, you probably have some interest in this already, you may have read all of this material already, but I'll be sure to do that when I'm sharing some links later on. And so I'm hoping today, I don't know if those of you who have your cameras on, how many of you are therapists? Are most people therapists here? Okay, so I'm hoping that you'll be able to leave here with maybe some ideas of how this could show up in your personal life, but also how this might show up with the clients you're working with, and some things to just kind of tune into, keep your ears open for, that might be normalized in US culture. I'm based out of Detroit. I think that when we talk about culture, it's important to name that US culture is a culture. I think there's this idea that we talk about culture, it's always like this other thing, and that we act like US culture is just neutral. We act like whiteness is neutral. But we are all, I think we're all in the US, like we all have some relationship to US culture. And so that's also really important in the subjectivity of where I'm coming from. And if we're serving clients who are living in the US, we can assume they've been exposed to some of this as well, regardless of what lived experience they have in terms of their own racial and ethnic identities. So the first thing on this list of 3 ways that white supremacy shows up in dating, and I know there are many, many more, and I really hope that there can be spin-off conversations from this, but for the sake of time, we will do our best to keep it concise. So of course, we cannot go anywhere in this conversation without first naming that white supremacy culture shows up explicitly in dating, right? This looks like overt racism, discrimination, this colorism. I mean, I also, as part of my subjectivity, you can see me on camera. I have lighter skin. Like I'm, adjacent to white privilege in that way. I have that proximity to whiteness. And we know that all of that impacts a person's experience of dating. And so it might speak for itself. It might be obvious, but I think that's important to name. And some other ways that this can show up explicitly are really about, the fetishizing of women of color, people of color, that it can really leave people feeling like they're not quite sure if someone is showing interest in them because of who they are as a person, or if it's because they're projecting a stereotype onto them that they're looking for you to fulfill. So there's this added layer of insecurity that we know that dating makes everyone feel somewhat insecure. It can really highlight our vulnerabilities. And when we are talking about navigating the world as a non-white person, as a non-Eurocentric person, there's this added layer of wondering, is someone really into me? Or, what questions do I need to ask or be listening for or looking out for to screen if they are just looking for me to fulfill a stereotype that is very often hypersexual. And the way that someone can really be objectified and over-sexualized and not seen as a full person in a world of dating that's already, I think, so many people experience as objectifying for many reasons, based on gender, sexual orientation, just like the influx of information on these apps of swiping. I think that in itself can make people feel really objectified. And then there's this other layer of, worrying, like, am I being tokenized, over sexualized? Will I be seen as a viable potential for commitment? Like, will someone take me seriously and want to see all of me? Just knowing that someone's showing interest isn't necessarily filtered in the same way as it might be for someone who's white. So that one was a little bit more brief because I think it's a little bit more obvious. And I'm happy to take any questions or if anyone has any thoughts, anything that brings up for them. And otherwise we can move on to number 2.
I have a question. If you're working with clients who are dating and they're part of the Black, Indigenous, people of color community, then how would you suss out, like, how would you have this conversation with them of like, here's something to pay attention to, or here's something you might be affected by? Like, I guess, what's the psychoeducation piece you're giving clients around this?
Absolutely.
And I know that's a really big question, but
No, it's so good though. It's so good. I would, based on my experience, I would think clients are going to bring this up. Like, this isn't that a therapist would need to educate a client. It would more about being, if you are a white clinician or if this is something that you haven't thought about, it would be just making sure your ears are open to it, that and being ready to validate that for a client, being ready to say, because a client might also be testing you, like, okay, I'm going to say that I think this might be happening, but are you going to gaslight me? Are you going to say, no, that's not true, that doesn't happen? I think it's really an opportunity for a therapist to say, like, yes, this is a valid concern that you are having, and I'm here to help you navigate that. I'm with you. I believe you. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What if you have a client, like I have one client now who I think some of the reason when I listen to her talk about she's African American, she has a strong preference for dating white men, which I think has something to do with her own self-image. But the person that she's currently dating some of the things that she tells me that he said, I hear some of that fetishism within that, and she doesn't recognize that. How would you recommend I bring this up with her?
Interesting. I would bring it up very directly, right? Like I would wait for a moment that it's coming up, and I would give very specific feedback of, when you say that he said this, what comes up for me is that he might be fetishizing you, and where does that land with you, right? But I wouldn't I wouldn't necessarily see the benefit in holding that back, right? Like if you're having that reaction, I would say bring it into the room. That's my gut. That's my first gut.
I have tried to. She just doesn't seem to want to acknowledge or recognize it. And I guess it's been a matter of, well, I don't want to force that thought on her if that's not how she's seeing it.
But that's got to be hard for you to listen to and to feel protective and want to have her to have a different experience.
I wonder if part of that might be that the client receives reward or validation even from the fetishizing. Just she might be torn about it, or like you were saying, Wendy, just not aware that it's an issue, or I don't know. Yeah, I'm curious what the values are there. And I know you mentioned difficulty with self-image, so that makes me think even more there might be some sort of reinforcement from those comments.
It's a really good point. It makes me think of how hard it is to tease out what's true intimacy and connection, and what does that feel like, and how does someone experience that versus just having this like validation and this compliment that isn't maybe really seeing them as a whole person. Okay, thanks so much. All those questions and comments are just so insightful. I really appreciate that. So number 2, thinking about individualism, right? So I think this is huge in the way that dating culture is right now in relationships. And I was thinking about this week and kind of calling myself out on this, because there's so much talk in the Instagram world of therapists about boundaries and how to set boundaries and why they're so beneficial. And I think that that's wonderful. And I have also created content on boundaries, and I'm think that I have some really important things to say. And then I'm reading about, white supremacist culture, and I'm reading about individualism, and I'm wait a minute, let me dial this in a little bit. We don't hear a lot about how to foster intimacy. I think that this is something that couples therapists do really well, and they do really well with their clients. They do really well in these online spaces, but I'm not sure that as a culture collectively, we really know how to talk about fostering intimacy in dating. There's so much emphasis on maintaining power. There's so much emphasis on protection and protecting yourself from getting hurt, on setting boundaries and being independent, being strong and independent and not needing someone. And I'm finding myself looking at Kate, because she's a super star when it comes to talking about codependency, and her and I have had many conversations about the way that word can actually be overused, and that people can feel really needy or clingy when what they might actually be experiencing is a very healthy human need for intimacy and connection. And that especially in the beginning stages of dating, I see this show up in a few different ways. I see this with clients in the beginning stages of dating, showing up with maybe feeling embarrassed that they care when they've only gone on a couple of dates with someone, maybe feeling embarrassed that they can't stop thinking about someone, or that they want to text someone and they're like feeling like that is showing all of their cards. But I also see it with my clients who are deeper into a relationship and who maybe do have a committed partnership and are still, it can come up at sort of like at every stage of intimacy, like, okay, some conversations about defining the relationship, conversations about, are we moving in together, conversations about who says I love you first, conversations about, getting engaged or married, that this desire to feel that closeness, there can be so much shame around it. And we can certainly talk about the way that connects to attachment style and how that might also be a reflection of some of the attachment style that my clients tend to have. But I also think it's part of the larger culture around dating and the way that white supremacy creeps into that space. And so let me pause there because that was a lot. Let me see if there's any thoughts or questions.
My question with this is, what would you say is like the dominant belief around individualism from white supremacy culture in dating? Is it like you shouldn't get attached, or you shouldn't care, or you should be happy completely on your own? Like, what would you say is like the primary message?
That you should make yourself happy and you shouldn't need anyone else to do that. That happiness is a you job, and that's it. That's the end of the story.
Okay. That's really helpful. Yeah.
And I was also thinking about the way that, another tenet of white supremacy is this like right to comfort and fear of open conflict, and thinking about ghosting and thinking about how quickly we can write someone off as toxic if there's conflict. And there's a lot of nuance we need to have around that, because if someone, toxic can also mean abusive or manipulative. It could mean some really serious things that we need to pay attention to. We don't want to, draw this black and white thinking around it. But there are ways that I think that when there's conflict, it's like there's this toxic positivity of like, well, they're being negative and they're being toxic if there's any amount of conflict. And that could go so far as to lead to ghosting. And this discomfort around, the open conflict, I think we might not always connect to white supremacy culture, but it's there. Like it's absolutely there, that we don't have a template or a model or a way of navigating these more difficult conversations. And the last thing I'll say about this part of individualism is, this confusion around how intimacy can or should feel. I can think of so many times in a one-on-one session with someone when they say something to me about how they're feeling about someone they're dating or interested in, and they say to me like, okay, now what do I say to them? Like, what do I say to this person? And they had just beautifully told me how they felt. And it's like, and I feel like nodding heads, like, you've had this experience. Like, well, there is no secret. Like, you tell them that. Like, I don't have a special way of saying it. Like, you just said it beautifully. Share it with them that. And it's like, oh, that hadn't occurred to me. I hadn't thought of that. And I think that speaks to this, like, we'll talk about perfectionism after our break, but the confusion around intimacy of like, I can just say what I need to say. I can just say what I mean. And it doesn't have to be neatly packaged. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be like in any special therapy language. I can just say it. And I think that can be really liberating for people to kind of have that permission.
Any questions so far? And then we'll pause to do donations, and then we'll talk about this a little bit more. But any questions so far what Amalia has shared?
I'm finding myself thinking a lot about gender and how that interweaves too. And I don't know if you need more of that, but I'd be curious about your thoughts of it, just because it feels like some of these scenarios also feel very gendered.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I know I have that in many places in my notes and totally overlooked it. So thank you for that. Yes, absolutely. And we will actually talk about this more after the break with perfectionism of, I mean, this fits into so many different categories of like the black and white thinking, perfectionism, individualism, or even just the history of gender roles, the history of where these ideas about gender even came from, are absolutely rooted in white supremacy and colonization. Like, we know that that's historically accurate. And so I love that you brought that up. And so much of my work with clients is unpacking, and I'm sure it is for many of you, is unpacking what parts of this are actually about your internal cues and your values in relationships, and what parts of this have just been have just seeped into you through osmosis, through the culture, that you have taken as truth, that you have to do this because of an assigned gender role or a gendered identity even, right? There's a lot of heteronormativity in that.
It makes me think that your role as a therapist is, besides like all of the skills, right, of validating, empathizing, all of, like the space you provide, it's also like really knowing a lot of the history and then how it presents now, so that when you're sitting with someone, you can really clearly help them suss that out of like, here's what your internal world is, but here's all of these societal constructs and how they're affecting you. So I would imagine research is actually pretty important in when you're providing therapy for women of color regarding relationships.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think of it as so much as just knowing what to listen for, that it's not that that we're entering the space with an agenda of like, we have to rescue you from white supremacy. It's more about just having that background knowledge playing, so that you know what your ears pick up on when something's like, when that doorbell's ringing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's pause here, and then we'll pick back up on this after donations. Oh, thank you, Silvana. So this is the part of the presentation where we pause for donations. And we have, Amalia has donated her time. And so this is a free workshop, but it's also part of what we do then is fundraise for a specific organization. And then my Business Lloyd Collective matches the donations. So Amalia chose Healing by Choice. And luckily we got someone from Healing by Choice to come and tell us a bit about what they do. And so Amanda is going to share about that. And she'll also put a link in the chat box for donations. So if you want your donation matched, you just need to private message it to me, the amount that you donated, and then I'll know what amount to match. And I'll also, we'll add up all the donations made, so then at the end we know how much we as a community raised today for Healing by Choice. All right, so I saw Amanda's link, and then Amanda, if you want to share, that'd be great.
Yes, hello. My name's Amanda Hill. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the CEO of Healing by Choice. And I put that in quotes because we like actively, it was kind of a play on words. So I'm the community engagement organizer with Healing by Choice, and we find that to be much more of an important role than the typical chief operating, chief executive type of hierarchical situation that happens in a corporation. But anywho, Healing by Choice is a circle of women and gender nonconforming people of color who are health and healing practitioners. And we do that from a number of perspectives. We do our healing with community, like recognizing that there is a collective genius among us, right? Not just people who have credentials, but also just we have this lived experience as individuals who are doing this thing called life. And so a lot of what we do is I do a lot of outreach to community organizations, super grassroots folks who, you know, may or may not have the opportunity to have healing services like the ones that we provide, these very alternative and traditional wellness practices such as Reiki. We do have some folks who do massage. We have tarot readers. We have herbalists and just all sorts of wellness practitioners. You know, we do sound healing. We do workshops online for groups to help them with peace circles and restorative justice circles. So we do a lot of those different types of things. And we kind of do a little bit of a pay as you can model because, again, we specifically like to reach out to really grassroots groups of folks who likely don't have the funding to like pay practitioners to come in and do these sorts of things. And so what I spend a lot of my time doing is just doing outreach and saying, hey, we're here. This is something we can do. If you have an event that you just want us to show up for, that's open to the public, especially, you know, that we can invite folks out and have people show up, let us know and we'll pay the practitioners and, you know, we'll just show up and do our thing, set up a self-care table. And sometimes we get folks to donate, you know, salves and tinctures and teas and all sorts of great things that we can give out to people to just show that there are folks in the community who care about them. And let's see, we come from a healing justice framework. And so healing justice identifies how we can holistically respond to and intervene on intergenerational trauma and violence, and to bring collective practices that can impact and transform the consequences of oppression that happen to our bodies, hearts, and our minds. And that definition comes from Kara Page and the Kindred Southern Healing Justice Collective, who kind of founded that term, healing justice. And it's basically about identifying the ways that like this generational trauma impacts us and intervening on that in the ways that we can. Okay, I feel like I have just talked a lot. But one more thing I want to add is that we are working on creating a mobile healing clinic, actually in Detroit. It's in the very early stages, but we're working with the Radical Wellbeing Center here to kind of ideate and build out something that can be sustainable, where we can start in one neighborhood in Detroit and expand our services as we, you know, grow to scale. But basically just being able to pop up in these places that, you know, a lot of places in Detroit are not well attended by traditional, you know, healthcare. So just thinking about how we can service our communities. And right now we are in the process of doing a lot of like surveying around that and power building and just getting input, because we don't believe in showing up where we're not wanted or needed. So just getting a lot of feedback on like, what services do people need? What can we, who can we work with to make sure that that's something that we can do long-term? So yeah, that is a bit about our background. And I'm wondering if there are any questions about the very, very long explanation that I just shared.
That was great. My question is, what do the donations go towards? When people donate today, what does it go towards? And I'm wondering if it's because you said people do pay as you can, and then somebody else is coming in and paying the, like making up the difference for the practitioners. So I'm wondering if it partly goes there.
Yeah, so some folks pay as they can, right? Like, and paying what they can might be that they have like a $50 stipend that they're able to make a donation to Healing by Choice, right? But we're trying to pay the practitioners a livable wage to come out and do these things too. So donations go to getting our services out to people who cannot pay for them or can, pay very little. And so it means that we're able to do that sort of thing where I'm reaching out pretty much on a daily basis to different organizations. I'm like, oh, I see that they're having an event. Hey, would you like us to be present to do this thing? Earlier, a couple weeks ago, we collaborated with an event called Safety Sunday, which was put on by several different grassroots organizations in Detroit, including Greenlight Black Futures Coalition and the March for Black Women and Detroit Heals Detroit, a youth group. And so they were just kind of putting on this event with a free store and all these different opportunities for people to kind of redefine what safety means to them. And so they asked us if we could give services, and they were not able to pay us because all of those organizations, don't really have funding to do that. And so we just showed up and, we had our self-care table, which we always have with, had our sound bowls and our coloring station and we had 2 Reiki practitioners, made some teas, gave out some tinctures. And so we were able to, give those sorts of like gifts and services in that space. And that's the kind of thing that we are really enjoying doing for the summer season as we've opened back up a little bit, just trying to safely get people some loving energy. Yeah. And as the time comes, it will also be helpful for the mobile clinic. But right now, there's not really funding that's going into it because we're in the ground floor outreach portion of that building process.
It's such a generous business model. Any other questions for Amanda about Healing by Choice?
I just want to say that as much as clearly I love therapy, I also love that you're really valuing healing modalities that don't always get the respect they deserve. And as we talk about white supremacy and medicine and what types of medicine is valued, I just really appreciate that Healing by Choice is not having that hierarchy on what gets more value.
Yeah, which also probably makes it harder in some ways to get funded. As I was listening to it, I was like, yeah, there's a conflict, right? If only certain things get funded, but then other things are more effective. So
yeah. And we do, we apply for grants and things like that, and occasionally we actually get them, but we also, the generosity of community is also something that helps us to keep moving things forward. So appreciate you for having us in this space to share about our.
Thanks, Amanda. It looks like we've raised, let me think. We have raised $260 so far. Yeah.
Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, and feel free to keep messaging me your donations. I wanted to say briefly, usually I pause in the middle to tell you very briefly about my organization, and most people already know about it because I harass you with emails. And if not, you're welcome to sign up for them. But I'm an LCSW, so I have a clinical practice that's all clinical supervision, and Wendy Pitts here is my clinical supervisor, and she's wonderful. And then I have a business consultation, which is this. This is it's Lloyd Collective. Oh, thank you, Aisha. And over there, I help clinicians. I do an 8-week program and help clinicians start private practices. And my goal is that they're more inclusive private practices. They're not necessarily like build your private practice so you can live the dream, but they're like really like connect with yourself and think about liberation and anti-racism work and build from that place. And I really love helping people build private practices. And I love that intersection of like mental health and business. My next cohort for that starts in August, and then I'll run one more cohort at the end of the year. And that's my work. So let's go back to Amalia's third point. And Amalia, oh, thank you, Amanda, for the website. Amalia, if you also want to put in your links so people can follow you on social media and other stuff, that'd be great too.
Sure.
Right.
Sure. I'll put that really quickly. This is a link to my Instagram, and my website is linked from there. So I'm not. And then really quickly, I'll just put a couple of links to resources, if you haven't already come across this type of information, it might be super repetitive, but if it's of interest. Okay, so number 3, when we think about 3 ways white supremacy culture shows up in dating, that's a mouthful. Number 3 is perfectionism. So there's so much to talk about with perfectionism that I think dating is especially prone to this because it's such a vulnerable thing to put yourself out there and to hope that someone will like you and will accept and honor all parts of you is such a vulnerable thing. And so I think, of course, that leaves us living in white supremacist culture extra vulnerable to perfectionism. That can feel like a way of having a sense of control. And so this exists not only for the individual of like, for example, thinking that someone needs to be perfectly live up to these colonized beauty standards, that, the thin ideal, like all of that is rooted in white supremacy, of course, not only on that individual level, but also as a couple, that there's one timeline that the couple should take, that it goes from, there's a right time to have sex, there's a right time to be exclusive, and that monogamy is the only way to do it. And there's a right time to then move in together or to get engaged or to get married. And like the list goes on. Like we all know this story, we all know this narrative of what's supposed to happen. And it can really leave us prone to losing touch with our internal cues. So the questions can shift away from like, how am I feeling about this? What are my values in relationships? What are my needs? What am I looking for? What do I like? How is this paced? Like, maybe being monogamous is not important. Maybe getting married is not important, or maybe we're not ready, even if it's been a decade. Like whatever the case may be, the questions can move from that place into this place of, like internalized Disney culture, for lack of a more clinical word, right? Like what's wrong with my relationship if we are not meeting these markers? And that there is a perfect way of having, I mean, I even think about the association, the language of like the perfect wedding and all that that symbolizes. And, you know, that you have to show that you're beautiful enough, that you're meeting these beauty standards. You have to show that you're in love enough. You have to show that you have enough money. You have to show that you're, you know, successfully hosting. I mean, there's so many pressures of how to do this perfectly. And I think that's symbolic of how that can show up in smaller ways throughout a relationship. And, you know, of course, this connects to, I like that this one is last because I think it connects to a lot of what we've already talked about around fear of conflict, that, you know, there's already this perfectionism when we think about being an individual and individualism. And then when you bring two people together, like, we know that is messy. We know that that is nuanced. We know that that is not neatly, something that can be neatly packaged, and that the best intimacy comes from mess, right? It comes from like that like beautiful mix of people that when you can't actually totally separate out, right? There's a sacred space that is created between two people, and that's a really warm, intimate space. But when we're thinking about perfectionism, we know we can't get to that space while also trying to operate perfectly. And we can't get to that space while we're trying to hold on to that. And I think this is a conflict I see come up with a lot of my clients, that they're wanting intimacy. There's this like intuitive pull, this intuitive draw that they know how to do it. They know what to do. They know what they need. They know what they feel. But that can be in conflict with the way that they're objectifying themselves and objectifying their relationship. And it can be hard to know which voice to listen to. And it can be especially hard if that hasn't been identified and hasn't been named. And so much of the clinical work is naming it and helping people externalize that they don't have to continue in believing that that's the way that things should be. Any questions about that?
I have so many questions, but also I want everyone else to know your questions are important too. So I'll ask mine and then please jump in. So hearing this last part, it made me think about narrative therapy and how that's all about externalizing, right? Like externalizing the problem, having a different story around it, and then relating to a different. So I'm wondering if that's what you're bringing into your work with around white supremacy, around women of color experiencing dating and relationships, or if you have a different modality that you find more effective.
No, absolutely. Narrative therapy, I mean, it's huge with that externalizing piece. What I also bring to that is a psychodynamic lens of really looking at, so like there's like this, I'm imagining these three circles of, you have the externalizing, there's like the narrative circle, you have the psychodynamic circle, which is really looking at where do these messages come from specifically for you in your family, in your life experiences, that is in that person's like smaller world, right? And then the third bubble, I'm imagining it's almost like the big bubble around all of it is the culture, and we have to know that that's like that wheel is always turning around these other bubbles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense with the psychodynamic piece.
Yeah, I think that people attach to parts of the culture in different ways and internalize it in different ways. And so there's that psychodynamic piece for me of like, what are the patterns that are playing out, that the ways that you've attached to this? Another way that perfectionism really shows up in dating is that there isn't always, it doesn't always feel like there's space to talk about doubts in a relationship. That it's, I would say, normal to have anxieties and fears and doubts when, at any point along the continuum of a relationship, whether it's early on or many years into a committed partnership. And listening, having the courage to like listen to those doubts in a really nuanced way of, where is this anxiety coming from? What does this mean to you? What is influencing it? Is a new and challenging way of operating for a lot of clients, because they've been taught that if there's a doubt, then if it doesn't feel right, then it must be the wrong relationship. And if there's doubt, that means that this person is not your person, because your person would be so perfect that you would never have any anxiety or fear or doubt around intimacy. And so helping people explore their context of like, anytime there's a fear or a doubt in a relationship, like I have so many more questions than answers. There are so many things I want to explore with someone, and not jumping to the perfectionism of like, oh, it isn't perfect, so it must be the wrong relationship. You've got to be strong, independent, get out of this. Like, this is toxic. I mean, I'm just like putting all of the buzzwords that I think that our clients pick up from social media and from their friends. And I mean, how can they not? Like, these are really, I mean, my clients are all very smart, wonderful people, but like, how can you not pick this up when you're living in it? Yeah, so I think helping people connect to their internal cues, explore what meaning things have for them, and over time, this helps dismantle this idea of perfectionism and objectification, and helps people live in that like really rich, nuanced place in relationships.
Do you encourage expression of the insecurity, even if it's like a broken record?
In their relationship or in the therapy room?
Both.
In the therapy room, yes, because I just really, I tend to believe there's still more that could be said about it. If it's coming up again, like, I mean, I would bring that up. Like, this is coming up a lot, right? Like, this is a pattern. What's happening, or is there something in the transference? Is it not about that? Is it about something that's happening between us? In the relationship, if someone's continuing to say the same thing, I would imagine that might start to feel like it's just like really hypercritical of their partner. Is that kind of what you're imagining? That
harmful or saddening? Yeah.
I would explore with the client, what is it you're hoping to communicate? What is it you're trying to get to gain from continuing to share this doubt? And is this working? Like, is this an effective way? I mean, of course, I would be interested in what's really happening unconsciously. Like, you're saying it's this thing, but this thing is getting resolved, or it's like, is it really this thing? And is there something that is happening unconsciously that can be explored that could then be communicated differently after the client gains some insight? Like, is there a different thing that needs to be said?
Yeah, it definitely points to inner work.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I would definitely point out to the client too, that if you're going to keep bringing that up in the relationship, you're going to end up pushing that person away. I have another client and he just broke up with his last boyfriend because he got tired of his boyfriend telling him all the time, I don't know why you're with me, and all of the like, why would you want to be with me? Why are you still hanging around? Why? He started thinking to himself, well, if he's that bad, why am I still hanging out with him? And broke up.
Oh, that sounds like a pattern to explore. Definitely. So I'm looking at the clock. I know we are getting close to our time, and those are my main points. I'm happy to take more questions or transition into the next thing.
Great. If there are more questions, please interrupt me or put them in the chat. I'm just going to take 2 minutes to talk about Instagram, and then we'll finish up. I did want to update that we're at 760 now for funds raised. So thank you everyone for being so generous. It's so exciting. Yes, so exciting. Okay, so I would love all of you to pull out your phone if you've got it, and look up Amalia's Instagram. Here, I'm going to put it in the chat box again so you can see. And there's 3 things. So there's a lot of things you can do to be effective on Instagram. And it's a really great way to make change and get the word out. And I was just thinking as Amalia was talking about all of the crappy advice you see on Instagram about relationships, about genders, about sexuality. Like there's so much bad stuff out there, but like people say it so firmly that you're like, oh, that must be true. So think of how important it is then to have accounts like Amalia's that are like, wait a second, no, like actually here's something helpful. So check out her Instagram, and there's 3 things that I noticed looking at it. And the first is connecting. So you can easily connect with people on Instagram. Some of the great ways to do it are being consistent. So even if you can only do it once a month, then just do it once a month. Whatever rate you can consistently do it, do that. By the way, don't look at my Instagrams because I do not follow any of this. That is not where I shine. But some people do shine there, and Emily is one of them. So consistency with your tone, with your colors, with your photography, with your fonts. You're creating in some ways a secure attachment, just like you do in therapy, and you want them to know what they can rely on you for. You want to be get them some object permanency with your Instagram account, because that actually does matter. Okay, the second thing I want you to notice on hers is the communication. So if you are going to be on Instagram, what I encourage is that you kind of take a piece of paper and pencil, brainstorm like your top 3 to 5 values, or 3 to 5 things you find yourself talking about with clients, or 3 to 5 things that you wish like all of your clients knew or believed or understood. Choose those and have those be kind of the foundation of your messages. So people don't get confused about what it is you're about. They know your values. They know kind of what you're there for. And then the third thing that I really love, which I really love that how Amalia does this, and I'll give a few examples, is don't just repeat things. Do something to be disruptive in your Instagram. Be focused on liberation. Be focused on like undoing some of the stuff that's out there. So some of the ones I found on Amalia's, she has a post that says your baggage is gold. Another one is there's no shame in wanting to hook up with your ex. Another is you're not a bad person for cheating on someone. Another is you're not stupid for not knowing better. You're not annoying. It really isn't about your weight. Even just as I was reading this, I could physically feel how that impacts me. And also it really bonded me to Amalia's work without even knowing her very well. And we do want our clients to know when they're coming to work with us, this is what it'll be like. So those 3 things, what was the first thing? Connect. So connect with people, and you can do that a lot through consistency and styling and messaging. Second is to communicate your values. And they're generally what you're communicating in the therapy room. And then the third is to be disruptive, to really look at it as this opportunity to encourage liberation of your audience. And yeah, follow hers and see how she's doing it. There's a million ways to do Instagram. We're not going to put white supremacy values on it and say that you have to be perfect or do it this certain specific way, but there are some really, obviously some really great accounts that do it really well in therapy and help create healing on this different platform. All right, so any questions, any thoughts as we end here?
I just want to really appreciate Amalia for having Healing by Choice on, but also appreciate what you shared tonight. I followed your account happily because I look forward to hearing more from you for sure. Your perspectives are really, really like refreshing and yeah, just encourage me to think twice, especially about the boundaries thing, because everyone's like, oh, my boundaries. In Healing by Choice, we talk a lot about self-care versus community care and how important community care is and like being in relationship and that kind of movement, the like boundaries movement feels like it doesn't, I don't know, access that piece about relationships. So just thank you.
Thank you. I would love to continue that conversation. I'm so glad that we're connecting and we're local because that's completely in line with my values. And thank you all so much for donating, for showing up, for the questions, for the insights, for giving me more to think about. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for donating your time, Amalia. So wonderful.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming, everyone. We'll see you at next month.
Thank you all. Peace.